Okay, this PowerPoint is designed to be a good overview of thesis statements, what they are, why they're important, what some common errors and weaknesses are in composing them, examples to follow, and then some discussion about the different kinds of thesis statements, specifically open versus closed. The essential definition of what a thesis statement is from the Rules for Writers Handbook, and they say that the thesis statement is the central idea, the overriding purpose to the piece of writing. An effective thesis statement will require further development through facts, details, examples, and support. And of course, that has to do with the nature of what your body paragraphs will be. Why are they important? It is critical to any piece of writing because it tells the reader what your essential purpose is, what you're hoping to accomplish. It provides direction for you as the writer, and it often points to the organizational pattern that you'll be using. In other words, is this going to be a cause and effect essay, a comparison and contrast essay? Is it going to be an argument essay? That direction should be obvious in your thesis statement. Here are some common mistakes. A thesis statement can't be too factual or too narrow because then there is nowhere to go with the body of the paper. In other words, there's nothing further to develop about the subject or the topic. But on the other hand, it can't be too broad or too vague so that no direction is being provided and you don't know what the writer is going to be writing about. Here's an example. What's wrong with this one? Is it too factual, too narrow, or is it too broad and too vague? The first polygraph was developed by Dr. John Larson in 1921. That's pretty obvious, correct? It's just a statement of fact. But let's go back. Is the subject of polygraphs worth discussing? Are there topics that could be further developed? And yes, there certainly are. You could go the route of writing about polygraph technology, whether it's effective or ineffective. You could go the route of exploring when polygraphs are utilized, by whom or for what purposes. You could delve into the alternatives. Perhaps there are new technologies or new ways of getting at the same information. You could get into what the legal implications are of the use of polygraphs because it's been challenged. You could even go into the evolution of the polygraph. How has it developed over time? So if we start out with what would not work, let's think about how we could further develop this topic. It's an old technology that's not valid anymore. And a tentative thesis statement could be, because the polygraph has proved to be unreliable, its use by private employers should be banned. So you're taking that same topic and you're focusing your efforts, and now the reader knows that what you're going to be trying to prove through argument, right? It's a should, it should be banned. Here's another example, very different topic. The way the TV show ER portrays doctors is interesting. So again, we have to ask ourselves the question, is this too broad or too vague? Is it too factual or too narrow? Yes, obviously, this is much too broad and too vague. We really don't know what's going to be discussed within the paper. And the broad, vague word right there is interesting. That's just not specific enough. And other vague words that should be avoided when you do a thesis statement are words like this. That's nice, that's good, that's bad, that's silly, that's fascinating, that's unwise. But here we go again. Could the topic of the portrayal of doctors in ER be worthy of exploration? Sure. And the best way to go about trying to figure out how to narrow focus and provide a quality thesis statement that's worth developing is to ask questions. And some of the questions could be the following. Does the show portray doctors in a favorable light? What circumstances does the show does ER show doctors doing, performing, etc.? Is it a realistic portrayal? How does the portrayal make viewers understand emergency room doctors? So these are all questions that go into the mix, and you could end up with something like this. You're asking yourself, in what specific ways are doctors portrayed? And certainly you want to ask yourself, can I do better than just saying it's an interesting portrayal? So here's a great revision. In dramatizing the experiences of doctors and nurses, that's what the ER show does, as they treat patients, as they navigate medical bureaucracy, and as they deal with ethical dilemmas, ER portrays doctors as caring and noble. So you can see from this revised statement that we really have a dynamite plan for how to develop a paper about doctors on ER. And the question is, what do you suppose those numbers represent in with the red text? Yep, it's your blueprint points. Those are going to be the areas of focus for this paper. And indeed, if it was to be just a 5-paragraph paper, you can see quite obviously body paragraph number 1 is going to be providing examples about how they treat patients on the TV show. Body paragraph number 2 is going to provide instances of them dealing with a complex hospital bureaucracy. And body paragraph number 3 is going to be examples and instances of them handling ethical dilemmas. And within all those body paragraphs, you're going to be demonstrating the positive character traits of the doctors on ER, showing their caring and nobility. We'll go further in the difference between open and closed later on in the presentation, but just know that the example that I just showed you with those numbered blueprint points make it a closed thesis statement. Here's another example, a topic, a very different topic, but we have to go through the same process. We're talking about mapping the human genome. And a tentative thesis statement for a topic about this might be, mapping the human genome has many implications for health and science. Well, that's sounding pretty good, but we still have to do a bit more work to have it be as focused and as effective of a thesis statement in order to get a really good writing plan. So again, back to the question, back to the idea of asking yourself questions. Should you just focus on health, just on science? Should you identify a biggest implication of the mapping project? Should you identify specific positive implications? Should you be identifying negative implications? How about this? Mapping the human genome has resulted in positive health outcomes. Now we know we're going to identify health outcomes, and we know we're going to be positive about it. So this is a decent open thesis statement because the reader already knows we're going positive, but the reader does not yet know what specific positive outcomes your paper might be examining. How about this? That's a good open thesis statement, right? Positive health outcomes. But how about making it even more focused? Taking that open thesis statement and making it closed. In other words, providing the reader the blueprint points that you're going to be discussing. And here's what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss how it's helped health outcomes in terms of cancer, how it's helped health outcomes in terms of heart disease, and how it's helped health outcomes in terms of respiratory illnesses. So a reminder, there are essentially two types of thesis statements. They can be open or they can be closed. Closed thesis statements mean that the blueprint points, the areas of focus, are specified within the thesis statement. As a general rule, and I do mean, ladies and gentlemen, as a general rule, a closed thesis statement will make developing a writing plan much easier for the writer. But it's not always going to work that way. As you move on to write longer and more complex papers, the thesis statement should undergo revisions. And what might happen is you might start out with an open thesis statement that's a little bit more general in nature, where the blueprint points aren't specified. But once you do your research and you gather all your source material, you might be able to go back and revise it and make it closed. In other words, hey, from all my research, I have found out there are primary areas of focus, and I might want to revamp my thesis statement and make it a closed one and identify specific blueprint points. However, there are situations, ladies and gentlemen, that an open thesis statement does work better, and maybe it's acceptable and even preferable. And here are two main circumstances under which an open thesis statement will work better. Number one is if there are going to be too many main points or main arguments. And here's an example of that. The consequences of urban poverty for children are far-reaching and long-lasting. So the bottom line is, for this particular topic, we are going to be discussing perhaps 6, perhaps 8, perhaps 10 consequences of urban poverty that are far-reaching and long-lasting. So we can't list them all in our thesis statement. Another example of a case where an open thesis statement might work better is when the point you're going to be making within the paper doesn't necessarily comport with particular factors or points or reasons. And many times this will be the case when you're writing about literature. And an example of that would be, Amy Tan demonstrates an unwillingness to accept her Chinese heritage. Well, that's a focused thesis statement right now, and you're going to develop that by just providing examples of what transpires during the story that shows that Amy Tan is unwilling to accept her Chinese heritage. So that's a case where an open thesis statement will make sense. Now, here are words to help you when you're trying to think about composing thesis statements, especially if you're going to compose a closed one. You're thinking about ways, you're thinking about reasons, you're thinking about causes, effects, impacts, benefits, and you see how these will all feed into what method of organization you're going to be using. If you're going to be using cause and effect, you're thinking about reasons or results. If you're going to be doing a compare and contrast essay, you're thinking about what are the similarities, what are the reasons. If you're thinking about writing a paper that's going to be an argument paper, then you're thinking about the shoulds or shouldn'ts, what should be banned, what should be expanded, what should be legal, what should be illegal, what should be changed. So in summary, when you're developing thesis statements, you want to hit a sweet spot so that it's not too narrow. You can't have factual statements, but it's not too broad and it can't be too vague. It should show a controlling idea. In other words, what approach are you going to take? Is it going to be yay or nay? Are you going to be writing about something that's positive? Are you going to be pointing out the negative? And it should suggest a method or a mode of development, just like I mentioned before. And can it be something that will be adequately developed within your body paragraphs? And again, it can be open or closed. Closed most